Audiobook Club with Steve Phillips and Matthew Leighton.
On last week's episode of Audiobook Club, our guest Tom Phillips, author of A Brief History of the End of the Effing World, suggested an audiobook for us to review and recommend, and he did so incredibly eloquently.
Actually, Tom, we need something for next week, preferably fiction. What would you point us in the direction of and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. Okay, well, actually, I mentioned Susanna Clarke for Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell there. Have you done Piranesi? Which was her follow-up book, a long-awaited follow-up book to that. I recommend that for a couple of reasons. One, she's a great author. Two, it's really short. So I think it's the audiobook's only about 6.5 hours because it's a nice short book. And three, the reader is Chiwetel Ejiofor. And it is one of the best audiobook performances I have ever heard in my life, to the extent that, as you said, there is a difference between sort of a narration and a performance. And then there is a performance that is so good that it actually changes your understanding of the text itself. Because I often do I'll do the thing where you've got the audiobook and the text as well. You can kind of sort of flip back and forward between them occasionally. And I have to say, it is... because in just the text itself, things that are sort of really come to the fore is sort of the deep strangeness of the world building that's going on in it, and the sort of the extreme lyricism of the prose, which made me miss that it's incredibly funny. And Chiwetel Ejiofor's performance really brings, and it's written to be funny. It is deliberate, and it's not like you wouldn't have noticed it in the text, but he really, really brings through, because he's got that. His superpower as an actor is the incredible sincerity of his voice. Like he can sell that he truly, truly believes something, and he deploys it brilliantly. And I won't sort of say why it's used, but just deploys it brilliantly to have a narrator who is all in on something in ways that you, as the reader or the listener, are kind of going like, wait, you're what? And it's absolutely brilliant.
So on this episode of Audiobook Club, we shall be immersing ourselves in the magic of Susanna Clarke's Piranesi.
Part 1. Piranesi. When the moon rose in the third northern hall, I went to the 9th vestibule. Entry for the first day of the 5th month in the year the albatross came to the south-western halls. When the moon rose in the third northern hall, I went to the 9th vestibule to witness the joining of 3 tides. This is something that happens only once every 8 years. The 9th vestibule is remarkable for the 3 great staircases it contains. Its walls are lined with marble statues, hundreds upon hundreds of them, tier upon tier, rising into the distant heights.
Audiobook Club with Steve Phillips and Matthew Leighton.
Hello and welcome to Audiobook Club, the podcast about audiobooks that is hoarding toilet paper and canned soup in a subterranean concrete-lined shelter ready for the onset of global financial nuclear winter. I'm Steve Phillips, with me is Matt Leighton. Hey Matt, you all right?
I'm good, Steve. I'm getting ready to hibernate. You?
Yep, absolutely. Hunker in the bunker. This week, now, confession time, dear listener. We attempted to cast an ear over Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, narrated by Chiwetel Ejiofor, released on the 15th of September 2020 at 6 hours 58 minutes from Bloomsbury. However, I have a confession, which was I had a bit of a nightmare week. This is obviously done in outside time, and wasn't able to read any of this week's book. This is why I'm going to be disciplining myself quite feverishly in the nuclear bunker this week, I'm afraid, Matt.
And weren't you glad when, as we started this call, I said, I've got a confession to make. I haven't read the book either.
We are going to be... But Tom, we shall get to this book. And we're going to sell this book as well, based solely on your evangelism and enthusiasm. And thanks for joining us again last week. But So in lieu of us not being able to be, well, we really have got no leg to stand on in terms of...
Hold on. Let me set her up, Steve. Let me set her up. So the idea is I was listening to this book, and if you listen to what Tom said, you can hear his passion and love for the book. And the clip we played after that in the intro is actually the opening of the book. And if you like that type of thing and understand the cut of Tom's jib in that sense, then we think you'll probably already be sold on that book. In fact, Steve, can you also? There are some other people who recommend the book. I've put in a couple of quotes down below. Would you mind? Rather, you don't get to read the blurb this week, but we'll let you pretend to be somebody else and read some of the quotes by esteemed people that recommend this book as well.
Yes, these are the people who put us to shame here. We really want to get into this book. David Mitchell says, what a world Susanna Clarke conjures into being. Piranesi is an exquisite puzzle box. The Guardian, it subverts expectations throughout, utterly otherworldly. Madeline Miller, Piranesi astonished me. It's a miraculous and luminous feat of storytelling. Brilliantly singular, says the Sunday Times. Erin Morgenstern says, a gorgeous spellbinding mystery. This book is a treasure washed up on a forgotten shore, waiting to be discovered. And the Telegraph says, head-spinning, fully imagined and richly evoked. So, yes, I'd certainly download this one. I haven't got around to doing the second part, which is listening to the thing. So,
so what happened is, as I was listening to it, I went, I've heard this before. And it came back to me that I had listened to it on the BBC Sounds app in the abridged version that goes out on National Public Service radio station in the UK, BBC Radio 4. The BBC Sounds app is always a good seal of approval. Last year, Steve, your book of the year, we listened to both the commercially released audiobook and to the version that was on BBC Sounds, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Yeah, we did. Yes, you did. You did BBC Sounds, and I did the full-on thing.
Well, I'd done both, so I'd done again. You feel like you're all cutting edge. So there are various points in the day on BBC Radio 4 where they schedule 15 minutes, and have done since the 1950s, for somebody to read a book, normally in 5 parts across the week, Monday to Friday. Of course, the way we listen to stuff has changed now, and I have a habit of consuming the omnibus editions of those audiobooks in one sitting, and often indeed as I nod off at night. So I'd listened to Piranesi before. I knew what some of the surprises are. And frankly, this week this is not my outside. This is all I do. And I'm afraid I didn't have the patience to have that gift unwrapped in front of me yet again. But while I was on the BBC Sounds app and while I was perusing the news, there are a couple of stories around at the moment that have brought the BBC Sounds app and listening to radio and podcasts through the BBC Sounds app to the news, to newspapers and websites. And what I'd like to do, Steve, if it's okay with you and I are both passionate about the BBC and what it does. We had a minor disagreement a couple of weeks ago about how well we think it's doing at the moment. So I'd like to talk about that. I'd then like to move on to BBC Sounds. And the big story is, in order to pay for stuff in the new environment, they're having to put adverts on it. And that is causing outrage because in the UK, we firmly believe that there shouldn't be commercial influences editorially on the BBC. And then I would like to just recommend some of the stuff that is on there because it's shorter than some of the 6.5 hours, as Tom said, is short for an audiobook. We found one that was 70 hours the other week, if you remember. The complete Sherlock Holmes for one credit, 70 hours.
Yeah, struck gold there.
But that can be daunting. And I think almost there are bits on BBC Sounds that if you and I do this right, could serve as a gateway drug to anybody who is looking to get a taster of audiobooks. Is that a fair way of doing it, Steve?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we talk about platforms occasionally, don't we? And the way we listen to audiobooks and the way we consume audio in all its brilliant way, shapes, and forms. So yeah, let's do this, because there's a few things I think we want to say about this subject, don't we? Okay,
so as I said, we'll start with the BBC. Steve, what does the BBC mean to you?
It's I'd see it as probably the only platform that can truly take risks, because it doesn't have the commercial. It does have commercial pressures, but certainly doesn't have to rely on advertising to survive.
But ideologically, right? Not looking at it in the now and what's going on with BBC Sounds. Take a really big step back and have a look at the 100 years of history of the BBC and perhaps how you interacted with it as a child, and then you went to work there and got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and earned less than you could potentially have earned at the time by doing a job that you loved. I mean, take us. What is the BBC for, Steve?
Well, I think I was kind of on the right track there, to be honest with you, mate. Before.
Well, I'm just very. I have a tiny attention span. I am very sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off in your prime, Steve.
Well, I get quite used to it. It's fine. See last episode, and episode before that, and one before that,
and right now.
right now, indeed. Yes, get on with it, Steve. So. This is what it is, I think, for me and probably a lot of people as well. It can do things that other media cannot do because it's able to take those risks. Now, you can have an argument about these days whether it does take those risks, because it's obviously under a lot of pressure. We mentioned in an episode a few weeks ago that it will self-flagellate sometimes, and really kind of beat itself up and kind of step back if it gets criticism. And obviously there's been some stories in the news where it has fallen short and things down the years. But that notwithstanding, I do have a lot of sympathy with people from who created really groundbreaking comedy stuff and what have you back in the 60s and 70s, and you hear those stories of Monty Python going up to the controller saying, "What are you going to do? We don't know." "Oh well, you can have 12 episodes," and just it's a massive experiment to maybe more people being involved than potentially should be involved to stymie that creativity. Whether it chases ratings or not, there's always that argument as well. However, for me, it does things that other people cannot do, wouldn't have the resources to do, wouldn't have the time to do because of commercial pressures. So that's why you've got, take my favourite subject, for example, Doctor Who, right?
Mm-hmm.
60 years old, the longest running TV science fiction show in history in the world, right? And it's about a bloke or a lady in a phone box, in a police phone box, traveling around time and space. Now, if you put that in front of a committee these days, would that get made now? Probably not. But what a wild and wacky thing, and what a risk taking that was back in the 60s. And in fairness, it's always sort of had it's always been up against it down various occasions in its life. But it's still come out on top, and I think that tells you a lot about it wouldn't get made by a commercial station if you'd had pitched it there. I don't think so. That's what the BBC is to me. It's the home of some real creativity, innovation, not just creatively but also technologically as well. It has been ahead of the game in various pieces of tech, from the one guy inventing the auto cue right up to the iPlayer stealing a march before any other streamers became mainstream. BBC Sounds was their kind of answer to how do we deal with sound in because we're not just vision, we are sound as well. And they had iPlayer radio and all the rest of it, and then came up with BBC Sounds. But yeah, that's what it is to me.
All right, I'm going to take a slightly different tack. Let's imagine we have an American listener. I mean, not blooming.
We should do, really. We should do.
Yeah, we should. And there's a 50% chance that said American is going to be somewhat hard of thinking. as evidenced by who's in charge over there at the moment.
But hang on, I'm going to interrupt you for a moment there. Massive disclaimer, that is a generalization, and not everyone in America is like Donald Trump.
No, but they wanted him. So 100 years ago, in the 1920s, the BBC was set up as the UK's public service broadcaster. In the States, you have NPR, which is a subscription-based model. And until about 2 weeks ago, you had Voice of America, which is the equivalent of the BBC World Service. And the idea is it's a very powerful soft power tool to spread your values across the world by broadcasting. Loads of people in Africa have learnt English from the BBC World Service, and in other places around the world as well. So not only do we're spreading our language and our culture. The BBC is unique in terms of its position as a public service broadcaster, is in that it is independent of government. So in countries like Canada and Australia, the local CBC and ABC are funded by tax, basically, whereas ours, and it's becoming less and less popular as time goes on, is funded by the licence payer. In order to have a television in the United Kingdom, you have to have a licence. What we got out of that in what Steve and I sometimes think of as a golden age of the BBC was 2 television channels and 4 radio stations. As the technology has evolved, we now have more television channels, the BBC iPlayer, which is the on-demand YouTube of the BBC, and the BBC Sounds app now, which has, I think it's something like 10 streaming radio stations, which are available on FM and DAB and online across the country, including BBC Radio 1, the pop music station, BBC Radio 2, the slightly older pop music station, BBC Radio 3, which has hardly any listeners because it plays difficult classical music, but the difficult classical music is part of the aim of the BBC to inform, educate and entertain. So again, it is where I get the notion of broadcast vegetables, i.e. serving the listener something that is good for them while pretending that they're being entertained. No, we like to entertain people, but we also like to do good things. And that is something that I get from the BBC. The thing is, as the climate has changed, the funding is... It is changing, is constantly under threat. But as a mate of mine who used to be managing director of the BBC World Service said, it's amazing. We've got an organisation that consistently turns over £2 billion a year, but we seem to be constantly feeling that we're in financial peril. So there have been many cutbacks over the last few years as digital technology. When we started, Steve, it was tapes and razor blades. It was really difficult if you wanted to edit an interview you had made, you would have to go to a reel-to-reel tape recorder, get your chalk, get your razor blade, and get your tape and put things together. These days it's done by computer. So the environment has changed. They're producing more stuff because it's easier to produce stuff with fewer people. I would argue that there has been a dip in quality. You don't always agree with me on that. But in the last few weeks, the BBC Sounds app in particular, where all of the audio is hosted, the pop music stations, the podcasts, the audiobooks, which are of interest to us, and the listen again versions of BBC News programmes and factual programmes and disability programmes and documentaries is all available. And in the UK, that's free. It's also blooming expensive. And you can now download the BBC Sounds app in other countries, but often you will be presented with a little advert at the beginning. Now that makes British people throw their hands up in the air in disgust and shock, because the whole idea of the BBC is that it is independent of government and independent of commercial imperatives. So people are outraged that now they are getting adverts on the beginning of their BBC programs that they're listening to through BBC Sounds. Have I done a reasonable job so far, Steve?
Is that within the UK or is that just internationally?
Right. So the theory is, and I have a bit of history here. 10 years ago, I was working for a company, a startup company that had a radio-specific advertising delivery technology. So what you would consider a pre-roll on YouTube, the ad that comes before, they did that for audio. And because I drove it quite hard, I went, well, the biggest thing I know with the most radio on it is the BBC iPlayer. It's a Finnish company run by an Indian gentleman who had been a former global board director of Nokia. So he was quite high-powered. And I managed to find the person in the BBC who, interestingly, was a lawyer who had been put in charge of getting adverts on the BBC iPlayer, on BBC Sounds, outside of the UK. So the theory was, in the UK, the license fee pays for it, but in the similar model used by Doctor Who and Top Gear, which are the BBC's two big international properties, outside of the UK, there is an opportunity to generate some revenue by putting ads around the programming, and that's fair enough because the people outside the UK are not paying the license fee. So recently, people have started hearing ads before programs, perhaps because they're abroad, or perhaps because their phone thinks they're abroad, or indeed the BBC Sounds technology thinks they're abroad. And there has been a clamour and outrage. And as a result of that, the BBC is now walling off. I think geofencing is the name. That means that basically you stick up a digital wall to stop people listening to it abroad. And this is particularly upsetting people in Ireland who listen to the BBC's international output. Yeah, so it's a complicated picture. The BBC, like most public service organisations all over the world, is terribly organised, and everybody works in silos, and it's inefficient. So at the time I was in the building, I said, so how many listeners are you getting a month? And if you went to a YouTube or a Spotify, they would have a presentation that says that. And the answer is they had so many people spread over so many buildings doing so many different things, often duplicated, that they couldn't give us a number for how many people were listening in the UK and how many were listening outside the UK. I'm sure that's changed since then. But the argument that this guy Ben made to us was, with the diverse programming that we have the music radio stations where you have to pay for music licensing to the performers. We have readings of books where publishers are entitled to a cut or to be paid for their material to go out on air. We have dramas that have actors in them who are paid by repeat fees. We have a substantial archive where we'd have to dig in and find out who we have to pay. Podcasts, however, when they're made, and the expectation for a podcast presenter or producer is that the show is available globally. So this is the point that they've chosen to start on. Because if you put an advert in front of a music show, anybody involved in the publishing or performance of of every single piece of music on that show should be entitled to a cut. The BBC has a license to do that in the UK, but frankly, it's illegal if they're doing it abroad. And thus far, because it's the BBC, internationally, they got away with it. But unfortunately, the chickens are coming home to roost. The BBC realises a large liability, which they were just sort of ignoring a bit before. But, the climate is changing. Doctor Who, the latest series, which went out as we speak, the first episode of the new series went out last week. It's now a Disney co-production. So, yeah, it's an interesting kind of... Steve, the easy way to put this to you, What have you listened to this week on the BBC iPlayer? I keep doing that on BBC Sounds. And how would you feel if you heard an advert before you were served that programme?
So I have listened to, I think it was Lauren Laverne's Six Music Breakfast show.
Mm-hmm. Same here.
On the week. There's Pulper on there. And
she's mid-mornings now, not breakfast, by the way. Lauren Laverne.
Mid-morning, sorry, beg your pardon. Yeah, you're quite right.
Former member of Kinnicky. I would say the high priestess of British music radio, wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, amazing. And Desert Island Discs as well, of course, now. And the other thing was, actually, now this is the interesting book, which we can talk about later on. The Adam Buxton podcast. Yep. On BBC Sounds, which is another thing I want to talk to you about, because I'm still trying to investigate this and how this has happened. How would I feel about advertising being put before that? Well, no, I would expect, being in the UK, listening to a BBC application.
No, that's fair enough. No.
Look, I've just heard of apps. It wouldn't be right, because I'm paying a license fee. So I would expect to be able to listen to it advert free in the UK. If I was abroad, actually, I completely understand why there are adverts. The advertisement's been going on for a long time. On, you look on bbc.com when you're abroad, and bbc.com/news. There is advertising on their news website. So this is not. I don't see a problem, and I think it's actually quite right that there should be advertising on services if you're picking them up internationally. It is a complex situation. What about British territories abroad? No, I know we don't obviously have the empire anymore for a number of years, so we're talking about the Falklands or whatever. But what happens to Gibraltar? I don't know.
Oh, the Falkland Islands.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, I don't see why there shouldn't be advertising abroad. The other thing that we could maybe talk about is there was going to be, and there may well have been for a short period of time, BBC Sounds, which you paid for if you were abroad. So it was a subscription app or whatever it was, or it was going to be anyway. But they were talking about chipping in if you're abroad, which I kind of get. Ireland, Republic of Ireland is a different kettle of fish because of the the geopolitics, the geography of Ireland. So, for example, Brexit it has obviously affected Ireland in a hugely massive way, but there are you can travel freely between England and Ireland, Republic of Ireland, with no issues at all. There are all sorts of special regulations in. So why would
without
you not
a boat?
Be able to, yeah. Well, why would you not be able? So I think maybe a special case could be made of not geofencing Republic of Ireland. But internationally, I don't see a problem with it at all. I think they do have to make money on it. They do, as you say, music artists and the rights to sports, to music, to whatever it is, need to be paid. And if you're hearing the BBC internationally, then the BBC should obviously be making sure that is covered from a legal and financial point of view. So I don't think anyone should really have a problem with that, expats chipping in for BBC Sounds internationally abroad. I wouldn't block it off, though. I wouldn't block it off because, but clearly they probably have explored all these options as well, of course, in the committee rooms.
Well, indeed, 10 years ago, and it's only starting to affect us and make it's still making the news today, and they still haven't sorted it out. And you're right, but and what you've said is there are many complicated strands and different angles. So almost music it's too hard to do, so we shouldn't do it. Ireland, well, just let them have it. BBC World Service, that's our projection of soft power around the world. We should probably let that one be free. And you can see already we're on the first paragraph, and we're already starting to make exceptions. In fact, the way you've spoken made me realise I lived in Australia for 6 years recently. And I would end my evening with the Today programme, which is the BBC's breakfast time news programme, which is where it's the most listened to BBC news outlet in the UK. If an MP is having a shower or a chief executive is eating a croissant, they will be listening to the Prime Minister being interviewed on the Today programme at 8:15 a.m, which is the big part of the day in live radio. I, of course, was listening at night because I was 10 and a half hours ahead. I would wake up in the morning and listen to PM with Evan Davis, which is I hate this expression, tea time news show that wraps up what's been going on in the UK during the day. It's a fantastic piece of journalism, and I was just accessing it because I could, because it was kind of a grey market thing, I guess. I didn't even think about it. But the interesting thing in your attitude is having access to BBC programmes is almost as much, for a person from the United Kingdom, is almost as much of a human right as water and free speech.
Well,
we're entitled to it. Well, it's the BBC.
You're paying for it. You're paying for it. You know, you have a TV license, don't you, Matt?
I do. Well, hold on a sec, Steve. Yes, I do, and this is quite important to me. And I hope that one day again I'll be able to do something for the BBC. But a condition of employment to work for the British Broadcasting Corporation, which I probably should have said earlier, is that you have no black marks on your record and have not avoided paying it's about 160 quid at the moment, isn't it? The annual BBC license fee. And as a result, even when I was living in Australia, because I believe in the BBC and because I have a vague hope that maybe they'll want an audiobook podcast one day, I made dang sure that I paid my 160 quid every year because I believe in it. That's going to sound weird to some people, but I did it on 2 points of principle. One of which is I believe in the BBC as an independent public service broadcaster that is financially independent. There's a weird thing. I was in Australia. The local commercial radio stations are allowed to find sponsors for the news. It's something we don't even notice in this country, but it's actually illegal for a commercial radio station to have the news sponsored. And that's because the BBC and the idea of impartiality and non-reliance on government and commercial constraints on their independence. For that reason, there are no ads on the BBC, but also it's dragged up the commercial sector and gone, your news has to be independent too. This is how you do it. And no, you cannot sell advertising around the news because that would imply that the person who's paying for the news may not like something you're saying and has an influence over the agenda. So it's all these little things that if you got rid of the BBC, you'd start to realise bits of our daily world that we take for granted would fall apart.
Yes, it's you often hear sort of commentators say, because it always gets bashed, doesn't it? The BBC, it's up there because of what it is. It's getting bashed. From a political point of view, it gets bashed from the left and from the right. So generally speaking, it's probably doing the right thing.
Exactly, that's what they all say, isn't it? As long as we're getting the same number of complaints from the left and the right, we're probably sailing the right course. Exactly
that. And it's just, you would notice it. You would notice it if it wasn't there. You would really, really feel it. So you would have certain areas of culture probably missing. You would have, I don't know. You would certainly feel it, definitely.
Well, okay.
It's a subjective view, I guess, but
and you and I both spent a portion of our careers at different times at 35 Marylebone High Street, which used to be the home of BBC London, BBC Radio London. Actually, in the last couple of years, a great big axe has been taken to the BBC's local radio stations, which traditionally provide accountability to local government. I think there are 27 individual local radio stations in the UK, normally named after a county or the group of counties or city they are reporting to, but also reflecting, and also in terms of local politics holding to account. But, you and I have had the discussion about, I used to have a radio in every room in my house. I now just carry my phone with me and cast to speakers or put on Bluetooth headphones. And partly as a result of that, the budget for BBC local radio stations has been decimated in the true sense of the word, as in it's about a tenth of what it was, and resources have instead been put into putting local news on websites. And I don't know, do you think about that on a daily basis? I'm not sure I do.
No, not really.
Let's hope. Again, there is a parallel to the stuff we're seeing in the States at the moment, which is, the SECC will investigate, if there is or isn't. That's my BBC equilibrium training kicking in there. If Donald Trump or anyone in the government has done some insider trading, the SECC will take care of it. They're clever people. Oh no, we sacked all them about 3 weeks ago. It is one of those things. These institutions provide stuff that actually I think we take for granted.
Yes, they do. Checks and balances, and yeah, I think it's very easy. We live in a very polarized climate. People have got a very, very short attention span now. We're pretty very materialistic society now. We want the next thing now. We want change now. We get very, very angry a lot quicker. But then again, I'm talking about online here. It does spill over into the physical world. But to be honest with you, you go out into the street and life is not like X/Twitter. It's not like that, is it?
No, that harks back to, in fact, the excellent Tom Phillips from last week's show. It's like, apparently this is the beginning of global financial nuclear winter, but it's quite sunny outside, Steve, from where I'm sitting.
Yeah,
that hasn't changed. Yeah.
Well then, yeah. Where are we at in terms of conclusions? What do you think here?
Well, look, we haven't even scratched the surface on this one. I was going to take you through everything I'd listened to on BBC Sounds in the last week. I was particularly going to recommend hold on, where's my bloody phone? See, I can't do anything at my blooming phone. Oh, dropped it. Hold on. The thing that kind of sparked this idea of this conversation that I wanted to have with you was, if I go into, so I'm on my app, I can browse all music, blues, classical, classic pop and rock, country, desi, soul, reggae, world, and then I go into speech, and I look at audiobooks. I could have gone to children's comedy, consumer, crime and justice, disability, documentaries, drama, families and relationships, food and drink, health and well-being, history, homes and gardens. All of these topics are all of them produced without the pressure of, if it's a gardening show, there won't be an advert for a particular fertilizer on there, and that the recommendations are not dependent on commercial imperatives. But if I go into the audiobook section, sitting there on top of the pile at the moment is the Sherlock Holmes short stories. Confession, of course, we all know that I'm a bit of a Sherlock Holmes fanboy. And these are read by Hugh Bonneville in a new version. This is how they start.
Welcome to Sherlock Holmes Short Stories. I'm Hugh Bonneville, and from the Noiser Podcast Network, this is The Adventure of the Greek Interpreter, Part 2. Last time, Dr. Watson was surprised to learn that Sherlock had a brother, Mycroft Holmes, whose intellect surpassed even that of the great detective. The pair met Mycroft at the peculiar Diogenes Club, where members are forbidden from speaking, except for in a special chamber called the Stranger's Room. There, Mycroft told them...
who doesn't want to hear Hugh Bonneville reading Sherlock Holmes, not just as an audiobook, but with subtle sound effects underneath? You can, when he gets out of the chair, you hear the brush of cloth as he gets out of the chair. But did you notice the use of the word from the Noiser Podcast Network? Did you hear that?
Yes, I did very much hear that.
If you listen on I don't know what the financial deal behind this is. Maybe it's something we need to investigate. But if you do find the same stories on the Noiser Network, that one was released this week, but you could hear it last week on Noiser, It's probably NOISR, I would have thought. They take out an E and think it's a name. But you get served with an advert before you hear it. So, again, I think for me, I was uncomfortable there when I heard from the Noiser Network. I went, that sounds like a company. Is that an advert for a commercial organisation on the BBC? That's how finely tuned my radar is to that kind of thing.
Do you think it's maybe an attitudinal thing, though?
Yeah, I think it is. It is a holdover from the 1970s. And my love of the BBC as public service broadcaster, inform, educate, entertain, independent of government or financial imperatives, that just isn't valid in the modern world, and I should shut up and get with the program. No, you shouldn't
shut up.
It's hard, isn't it? It's hard.
Media is for everybody. You have to get used to this stuff, right? Because everything. So one has to get used to this stuff because that's the way things are kind of moving on, and certainly if you're an organisation who's constantly been able to cut back, and certainly having worked in BBC local radio and seeing what gets cut and how much it gets cut, any sort of deals you can have still bring entertainment to people through the BBC that very, very much would be very BBC things. I don't think it's too much of I understand, and I don't mind it so much because I understand if there is a bit of a plug. One thing that was interesting to me was I love
the way this is, and I'm listening. Just so you know, since you said, "Shall we wind this up?" We've managed to find 5 minutes of conversation. We haven't even got close to an end. So you carry on. I promise not to have any more opinions on this episode of Audiobook Club.
So one thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't know about this, but I mentioned that I listened to Adam Buxton podcast on BBC Sounds. So Adam Buxton podcast is not. I mean, he's been doing it for years. He's very successful. It's a brilliant listen. It's for anyone who hasn't listened to an Adam Buxton podcast. It's basically a one-subject, long-form interview, and that's basically it. And it's very entertaining. It's very good. He has all sorts of very compellingly interesting people on there. Not all comedians who do the same rounds on the same podcast, but he has some really sort of fascinating people with stories to tell on there. And he does it in a very engaging way. But if you look on the BBC Sounds app and search for Adam Buxton podcast, it's being promoted on TV as well, like at the end of shows, at the end of credits now.
That's interesting.
On BBC programmes. And it's a selection. And I think they were all put on, it looks like, look at the dates, all put on middle of April. Actually about now, in fact, last week as we record this. It was, it's only about 11 episodes, but all put on the same day, including the latest one where he was interviewing Richard Ayoade. And so I just wonder what's going on there. I don't know who is benefiting and how that came about. I've searched everywhere. Why is this podcast on BBC Sounds?
But you see,
the rest of history is on there as well. That's on BBC Sounds.
It is, but the rest of politics isn't. But you see, that's fascinating. That actually good. It's not just me. The not outrage, but did that happen? Is so instinctive with you that if you find something like that doesn't make sense, your radar goes off and you go, how did this happen? I should imagine one of the solutions could be that the BBC went, oh, this is public service enough for us. We'll just let it happen. We'll give him a bell, see if he wants to be put on the platform. We'll give him the exposure that going on BBC Sounds gets. But then we remember the other way round.
I haven't listened to this, right? There is a 1-minute trailer for the podcast that was put on 10th of April. He may well explain why it's on BBC Sounds.
Can I just finish quickly? That when we had Jeff White on, who is the author of the Lazarus Heist, both a podcast and an audiobook about the North Korean hacking heists around the world, he said to us, wow, it makes such a huge difference when you get on Audible, you reach a broader audience. And Dirk Maggs, when he came on to talk about the most expensive audiobook production of all time, The Sandman, he said the numbers or the amount of interaction and feedback you get from being on Audible you can tell you're on a global platform, not on a local UK platform. And the rest is history. Is available through audio, because the part of it's a podcast app. But still, yeah, why would Adam Buxton want to be on the BBC? Well, of course, Adam Buxton wants to be on the BBC. Is he getting paid for it? I don't know. We should investigate. Just all of those questions have gone through my head because I care about this shit, Steve.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what the dynamic is. What's the BBC getting out of it? What's Adam Buxton getting out of it? And actually, it doesn't really matter if he's on there or not. To be honest, I just thought it was quite interesting to have him on there because Apple Podcast is the biggest. Safe to say the biggest podcast app out there, isn't it?
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Spotify, Amazon Music, they've all got podcast functionality, but and obviously BBC Sounds as well. So what's that there? But is this the BBC sort of testing the water with?
And again, you say that to me, and I go, well, if you're on Apple Podcasts, there's often too much noise. There are loads of people to stand up for, and I was about to use the word curation. Perhaps in some ways, if something's good enough to be on the BBC, it will be in a quieter room, if you see what I mean, with fewer things on the shelf. But this conversation that you and I are having now, 10 minutes and 30 seconds beyond when we said we're going to wrap up. I think we might return to this subject and we might try and speak to some people who know about this stuff. What do you think, Steve?
That'd be great. Yeah, good idea.
There's a conclusion. Have that.
There's a conclusion. Right. Let's steer us back to the world of fiction and fact in audiobook form. Because next week's book, we've had a change of heart, Matt. Tell us about next week's book, because this is your change of heart.
Well, yes. So we were going to do, it's his name, Gary Stevenson, the economics bloke who's doing the rounds at the moment, and thought it was appropriate. And then there's something that keeps popping on my radar. And the first reason it popped on my radar is, we confess, we get much of our aesthetic from the rest is Gary Lineker, Goal Hanger set of podcasts. We've mentioned them in another context already today. When listening to The Rest is Entertainment with Richard Osman and Marina Hyde this week, Marina Hyde said she had been asked to write a quote for the back cover of a new book that is about to be published. The book is called The Accidental Soldier, Dispatches from Quite Near the Front Line. It's by Owen Mulligan. It came out on 10th of April, and Marina Hyde said on the back of the book, "This book is absolutely incredible. It made me laugh more than any book in so many years. I found the writing just as unbelievably brilliant and hilarious and affecting. I am crazy about it." And there's a quote from John Oliver, loved it. Richard E. Grant, authentic and compulsive. Richard Curtis, he does some writing. An instant classic, a deeply funny and mordant book about war. And the whole idea, Owen Mulligan was never a career soldier, but he joined the Territorial Army, the volunteer army, Dad's army here in the United Kingdom, and suddenly he found himself not behind a desk anymore at his day job, but leading troops in Basra. And the book it's come across my radar a couple of times since. I think hopefully, Steve, we'll only be a couple of weeks late in reading a book of the moment. Yeah,
I hope so too. Actually, a point of interest, Owen Mulligan is Carey Mulligan's brother. So I don't know if I'm not suggesting any sort of nepotism or anything like that, because it's just a link. It's just a link.
He got the raw end of the deal there.
I'll tell you what it was. I'll tell you what it was. When you mentioned Dad's Army, I was trying to look up his age and see if he might be insulted by what you just said. So I can't get his age. I just got his family background. There we go then. So that's next week's book. Go listen if you can. It's only recently come out this week as we record. The Accidental Soldier, Dispatches from Quite Near the Front Line by Owen Mulligan, read by the same. 10th of April it came out, 9 hours and 29 minutes from Hodder and Stoughton. And let us know if you're listening to that and what you think of it. And indeed, anything else you're reading right now, let us know too, what we should be reading, what everyone else should be too. The hashtag is Audio Book Club. We are on Blue Sky and Instagram at Audio Book Show. And meaty discussion, Matt. Things we should be talking about, and we'll carry on the debate, eh?
Yeah, and again, look, both of us, one of the foundations of our friendship is the passion we have for the BBC, and it's important in this country. And I guess sometimes I hope we've done a job of conveying slightly to anyone who lives anywhere else just what a huge part of British life it is, and how we take it for granted and consider it a human right.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Right then. Well, we'll see you next week, everybody. And I'll see you next week too. Go well, Matt, and go well, everybody else.
Audiobook Club with Steve Phillips and Matthew Leighton.